My name is Alexandra Moore, and I was 29 years old when I finally understood the difference between being loved and being useful. At the time, I worked as a marketing consultant in a mid-sized city, the kind of job that paid well, demanded long hours, and rewarded consistency more than flash. I was the dependable one, always had been. I saved money, planned ahead, and believed that stability was something to be proud of, not something to apologize for. I didn't chase drama. I built foundations, and for a long time, I thought that was exactly what made me a good partner. I met Richard Carter at a mutual friend's party 3 years earlier. He was 25, then charismatic, restless, overflowing with ideas. He talked about creative projects the way some people talked about destiny, big visions, big feelings, big promises. He wanted to build a name for himself, travel, be seen. I remember thinking he was fire, and I was water different, but balanced. I fell fast convinced that opposites like us could meet in the middle. Richard didn't make much money in the beginning. His income came in bursts, small gigs, inconsistent contracts, so I stepped in without being asked. I paid for equipment he said he needed, covered rent when projects fell through, stayed up late helping him polish presentations after I'd already worked a 10-hour day myself. I told myself this was partnership. This was love investing forward. But looking back, it was always one-directional. I planned date nights, remembered his preferences, showed up when he spiraled. When I had a major presentation coming up and felt sick with anxiety, he canceled our dinner to network. When my grandfather passed away and I asked him to come to the funeral, he told me he had a deadline and couldn't afford the emotional distraction. I swallowed it, reframed it, told myself his dreams mattered, that sacrifice was temporary. Then there was Melissa Grant. Richard introduced her as his best friend, someone from his past, someone who knew him before all this. She was his ex-girlfriend, though that detail came out later, tossed casually into conversation as if it were irrelevant. They'd stayed close, he said, practically family. At first I didn't object. I didn't want to be that woman, the insecure one, the controlling one. But something felt off. He lit up when she texted, disappeared on weekends to catch up with her, posted photos with captions about soul connections and timeless bonds. When I asked about it gently, he laughed and told me I was overthinking. That Melissa understood him creatively, that she pushed him, that I was safe, reliable, grounding. Grounding, like an anchor. I told myself trust meant silence, that love meant patience. But deep down, a question kept echoing late at night as I stared at the ceiling beside him. If I was the partner, why did I feel like the placeholder? Melissa Grant stopped being a background presence and became a constant hum in our relationship. Not loud enough to confront directly, but persistent enough to wear me down. Her name came up in almost every conversation, usually wrapped in harmless stories, inside jokes from college memories, from trips. They'd taken years before I ever existed, references I couldn't quite place, but was expected to smile through. Richard spoke about her with a familiarity that felt intimate, not nostalgic, like she wasn't part of his past, but still stitched into his present. He texted her constantly, not just quick check-ins, but long threads that made his phone buzz late at night. I'd catch the glow of the screen at 1 a.m., his face softening in a way I hadn't seen when he looked at me in weeks. When I asked who it was, he never hid it. Melissa, he'd say easily, as if daring me to react. She's having a rough time. Or, she just gets it. Always followed by a half smile that made me feel unreasonable for even asking. Weekends started disappearing. He'd tell me he needed space to think, to recharge, to be creative. Then I'd see the photos later. Coffee shops, museum visits, sunsets, always with Melissa just out of frame or tagged, casually in the comments. Captions like, "Some connections never fade," or "Creative souls recharge together." I tried to ignore the tightening in my chest, the way those words felt less like friendship and more like a declaration. When I finally brought it up, I did it carefully. No accusations, no raised voice, just honesty. I told him it made me uncomfortable how close they were, how often he chose time with her over time with me. I asked him if there was something unresolved between them that I should know about. I even prefaced it with reassurance, telling him I trusted him and just wanted clarity. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an apologetic one, a sharp, dismissive sound that made my face burn. "Alexandra, don't be that person," he said, shaking his head like I'd embarrass myself. "Melissa is like family. She's basically my sister at this point. You're my girlfriend. Act like it." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep and painful. Act like it. As if being his partner meant swallowing discomfort quietly. As if trust meant never questioning anything no matter how it felt. That was when he casually mentioned that yes, they had kissed once in college. Just once. Just a long time ago. It meant nothing. He said it like he was doing me a favor by being honest, like this tiny confession should erase the months of unease. When I asked why he hadn't told me earlier, he shrugged. Because it's irrelevant. You're making it weird. The conversation flipped so smoothly I almost didn't realize what had happened. I went in expressing discomfort and came out feeling guilty. He accused me of being jealous of projecting my insecurities onto him. He said Melissa supported his creativity in ways I didn't understand, that she challenged him, inspired him, that I was comfortable, stable, safe. Safe. The word landed like an insult wrapped as praise. I started questioning myself instead. Was I too rigid, too boring, too focused on the future? I replayed every moment. I'd hesitated every time I'd asked for reassurance, wondering if I was slowly becoming the controlling partner he accused me of being. Meanwhile, he continued doing exactly what he wanted, untouched by doubt, untouched by consequence. The imbalance grew clearer with time. I rearranged my schedule for him. He rearranged nothing for me. When I asked him to attend a work event that mattered to me, he claimed anxiety. When Melissa needed support, he dropped everything. He told me real partners gave each other freedom, but somehow that freedom only flowed one way. At night, lying next to him while he scrolled through messages from her, I felt lonelier than I ever had single. I started to understand something I hadn't wanted to admit before. I wasn't competing with another woman romantically. I was competing with the version of him that only existed around her. And I was losing. By the time I booked the anniversary trip to Greece, part of me already knew it wasn't going to fix us. I told myself it was a reset, a chance to reconnect. But deep down, there was another thought I didn't want to face yet. Maybe I was planning the trip for closure, not reconciliation. The Greece trip was supposed to be my proof to myself that I hadn't imagined everything, that if I just gave us the right setting, enough beauty, enough distance from distractions, Richard and I would find our way back to each other. I had been saving for months, quietly, skipping dinners out, passing on a short vacation with my own friends, telling myself there would be time for all that later. I wanted this trip to feel intentional, romantic, ours. I booked the flights, chose a small coastal town instead of a tourist-packed city, reserved a cozy hotel with balconies overlooking the water. I even splurged on a private boat tour at sunset. Something I'd pictured for weeks, the two of us wined in our hair, no phones, no interruptions. When I finally told Richard over dinner, he seemed genuinely excited. He reached across the table, squeezed my hand, told me it sounded perfect. For a moment, I felt relief bloom in my chest. Maybe I'd been overthinking. Maybe we just needed time. But the shift came quickly. Within days, his attention drifted back to his phone. He smiled at messages he didn't explain. I recognized the pattern by then. Melissa's name didn't need to be spoken for me to feel her presence. I focused on logistics, on packing lists, on confirming reservations, anything to quiet the questions in my head. The weeks leading up to the trip felt heavy. We packed together, folded clothes side by side, laughed at nothing in particular, all while something unspoken sat between us. I watched him text while we lay in bed, his screen tilted just enough that I couldn't see the words. I didn't ask anymore. I observed. One evening, while we were scrolling through photos of Greece on the couch, he casually mentioned that Melissa had been having a rough time lately. He said it like it was background information like weather. I nodded, not engaging. But he kept going. Talked about her recent breakup, how lost she felt, how much she loved history and architecture. She's always wanted to see Greece, he added almost absent-mindedly. My stomach tightened. A few days later, over breakfast pancakes I'd made from scratch, trying to keep things light, it happened. We were discussing the itinerary when Richard looked up from his phone and said, "Hey, I didn't think you'd mind if Melissa came on the trip too." Just like that. I froze fork, hovering midair. I waited for him to laugh to say he was joking. He didn't. He scrolled through his phone as if he'd just asked whether we needed more coffee. "This is our anniversary trip," I said carefully. "I planned it for us. Why would she come?" He looked up then, irritation flickering across his face. "Alexandra, don't start. She's going through a lot. It's not a big deal. It could be fun having a third person for some things. We don't have to be together every second." I reminded him how long I'd planned it, how much it meant to me. I told him it wasn't about jealousy, it was about boundaries. I mentioned how close he and Melissa were, how it already made me uncomfortable. I asked again if there was something between them I didn't know. That's when his tone changed. "Oh my God," he said, laughing softly. "You're really doing this. You're being insecure. Melissa is my best friend. If you actually trusted me, you'd understand. I can't just abandon her when she's hurting." He framed it like a moral failing on my part, as if saying no meant I lacked empathy. He added that Melissa could help take photos for his content, that it would be good for his brand. "It's a win-win," he said, like he'd solved a problem I didn't know we had. I pointed out the hypocrisy, how he would react if I suggested bringing a male friend. He waved it off. "That's different," he said, without explanation. By the end of the conversation, I felt hollow. Every concern I raised was twisted back onto me. Too possessive, too sensitive, too rigid. He told me he needed freedom, that real relationships weren't about control, that he deserved support. Something inside me went quiet then. I looked at him across the table at the man I'd supported for years and understood that he didn't see me as a partner anymore. I was the infrastructure of his life, useful, reliable, replaceable. So I smiled. "You're right," I said evenly. "Bringing friends sounds great." His face relaxed instantly. He went back to his phone, already typing, already celebrating a victory he didn't realize would cost him everything. That night, while he worked in the bedroom and left me the guest room, I lay awake replaying every red flag I'd ignored. The posts, the dismissals, the way he'd compared my stability to her excitement. I wasn't angry. I was clear. This wasn't love. And for the first time in a long while, I stopped trying to fix it. Clarity doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't kick down doors or demand speeches. For me, it came quietly in the space where disappointment finally outweighed hope. The morning after our conversation, Richard left early saying he had errands to run. He didn't say where. He didn't have to. By then, I recognized the pattern well enough to know Melissa would be somewhere on his agenda. Once the door closed behind him, the apartment fell silent in a way that felt different, not lonely, but resolute. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling in front of me and let myself replay everything without softening the edges. The way he'd smiled when I agreed. The ease with which he'd dismissed my feelings. How quickly he'd accepted that our anniversary, something I had poured time, money, and emotion into, was flexible when it suited him. I opened my laptop. The airline app loaded faster than I expected. 2 tickets, my name, his name, our seats side by side. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Not because I wanted to go back, but because I wanted to be certain. This wasn't spite. This wasn't revenge. This was a boundary. I thought about all the times I'd explained myself only to be misunderstood on purpose, all the emotional labor I'd done just to be told I was too much. Then I thought about Ethan Parker, a colleague from work who had become a friend over the years, steady, kind, and consistently respectful. He'd listened to me vent without taking sides, never pushed, never blurred lines. Entirely platonic, entirely safe. I sent him a message. I didn't overshare. I didn't dramatize. I just told him the truth, that I had a trip booked, that plans had changed, and that I didn't want to go alone. His reply came minutes later. "Say less. When do we leave?" That was it. I transferred Richard's ticket to Ethan's name. The confirmation email arrived almost instantly. A small, neat acknowledgement that a choice had been made. I booked my ride to the airport, packed my suitcase, methodically folding clothes, the same way I always did, as if this were any other trip. Before I left, I wrote a short note and placed it on the counter. No accusations, no explanations, just a single sentence: "I've handled the trip details." When I closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. At the airport, I arrived early, checked in without issue, and sat at the gate watching planes taxi across the runway. My phone buzzed once, then again. Richard's name flashed across the screen. I didn't answer. I didn't need to imagine what had happened to know. He would have discovered it at check-in. His ticket missing, his assumption unraveling in real time. I pictured the confusion, the anger, the scramble to call me, not with remorse, with entitlement. How dare I change something he thought he controlled? By the time we boarded, my phone was lighting up nonstop. Calls, voicemails, messages I didn't open. I switched it to airplane mode as the plane began to move, the hum of the engines drowning out everything else. Ethan took the seat beside me, grinning as if we were heading off on a spontaneous adventure rather than the aftermath of a collapsed relationship. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, and for the first time in months, I meant it. As the plane lifted into the sky, the city shrinking beneath us, I felt something loosen in my chest. No shouting, no public confrontation, no drawn-out arguments that would only give Richard more chances to rewrite the narrative. This wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. And whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I was done begging to be chosen. Greece felt unreal at first, like I'd stepped into someone else's life by accident. The air was warmer than I expected, heavy with salt and sunlight. The kind of warmth that seeps into your skin and makes everything slow down. Ethan and I took the ferry to the small coastal town where I'd booked the hotel. White buildings stacked against the hills, blue shutters open to the sea. No one was rushing us. No one was asking for explanations. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. Before takeoff, I'd blocked Richard everywhere that mattered: social media, email, messaging apps. His number stayed unblocked for exactly one reason. I wanted him to understand that the silence wasn't technical. It was intentional. After the first night, even that stopped buzzing. Either he'd exhausted himself or reality had started to settle in. Ethan was easy to be around. Not in a distracting way, not in a way that made me feel like I had to perform. He didn't pry or ask for details unless I offered them. We talked about work, about places we wanted to see, about how strange it was that life could change direction so suddenly. There was no undercurrent of tension, no unspoken competition with a third person who wasn't there but somehow always present. That absence was its own kind of relief. We explored the town slowly, walked narrow streets, shared meals that lasted hours, watched the sun drop into the water from the balcony of the hotel. On the second day, we took the private boat tour I'd originally booked for Richard. As the boat cut across the water wind tangling my hair, I felt something shift. Not excitement, clarity. I wasn't constantly scanning someone else's mood. I wasn't waiting to see if I'd be dismissed for a text notification. I wasn't bracing myself for comparisons. I could just exist. One afternoon, sitting at a cafe overlooking the sea, Ethan asked me why I'd stayed as long as I had. The question wasn't accusatory, it was curious. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I told him the truth, that I'd mistaken endurance for loyalty, that I'd believed being chosen meant being patient enough to wait. He nodded, understanding more than he said. By the third day, the weight I'd been carrying for years felt lighter. I slept better. I laughed without second-guessing myself. I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to be reasonable, trying not to ask for too much, trying to prove I wasn't replaceable, all while slowly disappearing. I posted one photo online from a new private account. Just the sea. No people. No tags. The caption was simple: New Horizons. That was it. No explanations. No shade. Back home, things were unraveling for Richard. I didn't know the details yet, I didn't ask, but distance has a way of clarifying patterns, and I knew him well enough to imagine the fallout. The confusion would turn to anger, the anger to blame. He'd tell anyone who would listen that I'd overreacted, that I'd humiliated him, that I was dramatic. What he wouldn't say was that he'd assumed I would fold. As Greece unfolded around me, I felt something unfamiliar settle in peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on someone else behaving differently, but the solid kind that comes from alignment, from finally acting in a way that matched what I knew to be true. I wasn't punishing him. I was choosing myself. And somewhere between the salt air and the quiet mornings on the balcony, I understood that whatever I'd lost by leaving had already been gone for a long time. I didn't witness Richard's collapse in real time, and that mattered more than I realized. When you stop watching someone, you stop giving them power. Whatever happened back home unfolded without my commentary, without my reactions, without the emotional fuel he'd grown accustomed to. I stayed in Greece a few more days, soaking in a version of myself that felt quieter but stronger. And then I flew back, ready to move forward, not backward. The updates came later, fragmented, unsolicited, passed to me by people who didn't know what to say, but felt compelled to say something. It started at the airport. Richard lost it when he realized his ticket didn't exist. He argued with the desk agent, demanded answers that didn't favor him, called me over and over until security intervened. Someone filmed part of it. Not enough to go viral, but enough to circulate, enough to bruise his ego. He posted a story shortly after, emotional, dramatic, carefully framed. Talked about betrayal, about being abandoned, about how women couldn't be trusted. He tagged Melissa. That was the moment the illusion cracked. Melissa, no longer constrained by secrecy, stepped fully into the role she'd been circling for months. She comforted him publicly, defended him online, and privately, she took advantage of his vulnerability. Within days, they were inseparable. Within a week, they were planning a healing getaway on his dime. Friends later showed me the messages she sent him. Confessions disguised as reassurance. Admissions that the emotional affair had been building for months. That I was too predictable, too safe. That he deserved passion, spark, risk. Richard chose her. And then she did exactly what people like her always do once they get what they want. She drained him. She leaned on his resources, his contacts, his sympathy. She pushed him to spend money he didn't have on a weekend trip meant to prove something to social media. Once that trip was over, once the attention had faded, she disappeared. Blocked him mid-conversation. Left him stranded at a cheap motel after borrowing cash for gas. A mutual friend later told me she was already back with her own ex, posting smiling photos like nothing had happened. Richard unraveled fast after that. His posts became erratic, angry, defensive. People noticed the hypocrisy. Commenters started calling him out, pointing out that he'd tried to bring his ex on a trip I funded, then played the victim when I removed myself. Sponsors quietly backed away. Gigs dried up. Friends who had initially defended him stopped answering his calls once screenshots of his messages surfaced. The man who had once told me he needed freedom found himself isolated. Meanwhile, my life expanded in ways I hadn't predicted. Work noticed the shift in me, the clarity, the confidence. I landed a promotion that came with travel and creative control. I moved into a new apartment with light pouring through the windows every morning. Ethan and I stayed close, but we didn't rush anything. There was no urgency, no manipulation, no pressure to define things before they were ready. From a distance, the contrast was stark. Richard had dismissed stability as boring loyalty, as a given. He'd chased excitement and lost everything that had anchored him. The karma wasn't loud or theatrical. It was precise, efficient. It returned his choices to him without commentary. A few months after Greece, the messages started. At first, they were careful, apologetic. He framed everything as a misunderstanding, claimed Melissa meant nothing, said he'd been confused, overwhelmed, misled. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Desperation replaced regret. He told me he missed us, the plans, the stability, the life I'd built around him. When that didn't work, he showed up at my door. I opened it calmly, listened, let him talk himself into circles. He admitted he was broke, that he was staying with friends, that Melissa had used him and vanished. He said he finally understood what he'd lost, that he needed me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just told him no. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was disbelief. He had never imagined a future where I wasn't available as a fallback. And in that moment, I understood something clearly, not with bitterness, but with finality. Some people don't regret losing you. They regret losing access to what you provided. I closed the door without another word. 6 months after Greece, I was standing in a vineyard in northern Italy. Sunlight filtering through rows of grapevines, fairy lights beginning to glow as evening settled in. The air smelled like wine and warm earth, and laughter drifted between tables dressed in white linen. It was Jake and Olivia's wedding, the kind of celebration that makes you believe in new beginnings whether you want to or not. Or, I had one. My career had taken off in ways I hadn't imagined, back when I was shrinking myself to keep someone else comfortable. The promotion came with travel autonomy and a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. I'd moved into a new apartment with wide windows and quiet mornings. And beside me, weaving easily through conversation with people she'd never met before, was Ethan, not as a rebound, not as a reaction, but as my partner. We'd taken our time, built something slow and deliberate. No power struggles, no emotional audits. He didn't need to be convinced to show up. He just did. I was mid-conversation when I felt it, that familiar tightening in my chest, the instinctive awareness that comes from shared history. I turned, and there he was. Richard. He hadn't been invited. He'd come as a last-minute +1, exploiting a technicality and a loose guest list. Time hadn't been kind to him. His suit didn't quite fit. His smile was forced. The confidence he used to wear so effortlessly now slipped in and out, replaced by something brittle. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on me, and then on Ethan. He cornered me during cocktail hour, pulling me aside near the edge of the vineyard, where the music softened but didn't disappear. His hand brushed my arm tentative, like he was asking permission he no longer had. Alexandra, he said quietly, please, just hear me out. I listened. I always had. He told me he'd made mistakes, that Melissa had been toxic, that he'd been manipulated, misled, drained. He said he finally saw how good I'd been to him, how stable, how supportive. He talked about Greece like it was something stolen from him, not something he'd forfeited. You humiliated me, he said, voice cracking. You replaced me. I met his eyes calm in a way that surprised even me. You said bringing friends on trips wasn't a big deal. I applied your logic. He flinched. I love you, he said quickly. Desperation creeping in. We had something real. You owe me a second chance after everything I put up with. There it was. The entitlement, the rewriting of history, the belief that my patience had been a debt he could collect on whenever he was ready. I don't owe you anything, I said evenly. You taught me what I won't accept again. His face hardened, the mask slipping. So this is it. You're really going to throw everything away for him. At that moment, Ethan approached, slipping his hand into mine with easy familiarity. Everything okay? He asked. I smiled. Yes. I turned back to Richard. Richard, this is Ethan, my partner. The word landed cleanly. No hesitation. No apology. People nearby glanced over, sensing the shift. Richard stood there, exposed in a way he'd never experienced before, not rejected in private, but rendered irrelevant in public. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Ethan and I walked back toward the lights, toward music and laughter, toward a future that didn't require justification. I didn't look back. I don't think about Richard anymore. Not with anger, not with regret. He was a chapter, a necessary one, but not the story. The lesson was simple and